Not only are the RNLI failing to perform their duty, the police as well, Essex police in particular, also increasingly see it as their role to ferry in subversive crowds of far-left, race communist agitators to provoke peaceful members of the law-abiding public who are sick of being taxed to subsidise the livelihoods and indeed increasingly the crimes of their own replacements.
Then the footage emerged, and when they were confronted with this, the head of Essex Police suddenly discovered that he's in favour of free speech, because he said the police were doing their due diligence to ensure that the protesters could exercise their right to freedom of assembly. Now, bear in mind, this is the same Essex police that threatened Alison Pearson with arrest under, I think it was a terrorism act. This is the kind of woman that's the avatar of all the people all the white middle class sort of civil servants and middle managers that were chanting along with Bob Villan at Glastonbury that the Gammons are going to be dispossessed of their own country because he has some sort of historical ethnic grudge despite being half English himself. And so lots of people are just going, oh, right, this isn't actually a conversation. This isn't a debate with shared premises. We're not negotiating marginal tax policies in order to fund public services. You just hate me because of my skin colour and you want to steal my country away from me.
How quickly you saw the protests outside the hotel in Epping re-emerge in Canary Wharf was astonishing.
Yes.
And I loved it.
Yeah, his containment operations are getting particularly weak. I feel like the fish in SpongeBob. How many times do I have to teach you this lesson, old man? Anyway.
Hello and welcome to Deprogrammed. This is the NCF show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of conformity, especially among the young. I'm Harrison Pitt. I'm a fellow at the New Culture Forum, and I'm thrilled to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, my co-host and one of the leading contributors at Courage Media, and our special guest panellist this week, none other than Charlie Bentley-Astor, one of our best young writers and commentators, as well as a friend of the NCF. Charlie, good to see you again.
I kind of run out of ways to say, hi, nice to be here.
Yes, this is your third appearance, I think. So,
yeah.
an accolade in itself. You're in good company. So, Connor, I'll start with you. Everyone knows by now in this country that the RNLI ferries in boats of invading fighting age foreign men most days of the week, particularly over the summer months. That's where we are now, of course. But it also seems as though not only are the RNLI failing to perform their duty, the police as well, Essex police in particular, also increasingly see it as their role to ferry in subversive crowds of far-left, race communist agitators to provoke peaceful members of the law-abiding public who are sick of being taxed to subsidise the livelihoods and indeed increasingly the crimes of their own replacements. Essex police finds itself in the dock. They've issued a pretty grovelling apology on the matter, though they're being sort of contradictory about it. How do we make sure that this doesn't go unpunished?
Okay, so for a bit of context, this is in reference to the Epping protests outside the Bell Hotel that have been going on for about a week to 10 days now after a Ethiopian illegal migrant broke into Britain and 8 days later was milling about on a high street and decided to sexually assault by attempting to snog a 14-year-old girl. He was convicted of 3 sex offences, and when his name, which might as well be written in hieroglyphics, I can't pronounce it,
Hadesh Gerbelezi Kabatu,
bless you, was released, the Essex locals went, well, hang on a minute, they're in that hotel, there's a school nearby, what on earth are you doing? And spontaneously, of their own accord, started protesting outside the hotel. And then the usual controlled spontaneity exercises kicked into high gear with the Socialist Workers' Party's Stand Up to Racism renter mob emerging with their placards and started screaming, say it loud, say it clear, refugees are welcome here, till their voice was hoarse. People wondered how they got to the front lines of said organic protest so quickly, and there were allegations from people on the ground, sort of street-level journalists, the likes of David Shipley, who helped break the story to the Telegraph, that the police had been escorting there like it was a sort of communist conga line. And the police had said, no, not happening. They actually hid behind the weasel words recently of, well, we didn't bust them in.
Yes.
Like, oh, brilliant. I'm glad you didn't, provide them police escort in your personal independence vehicle or something. But instead, then the footage emerged, and when they were confronted with this, the head of Essex Police suddenly discovered that he's in favour of free speech, because he said the police were doing their due diligence to ensure that the protesters could exercise their right to freedom of assembly. Now, bear in mind, this is the same Essex police that threatened Alison Pearson with arrest under, I think it was a terrorism act, for a tweet about pro-Palestine protesters this same year. So, excuse me if I don't believe their commitment to that, but what this renter mob is symptomatic of is, yet again, the Home Office funneling money to these spontaneous, well, appearing to be spontaneous, activist groups who always have placards and always have slogans at the ready, a kind of rapid response unit funded by the likes of the Paul Hamlin Foundation or of Hope Not Hate, so that any time a local resident gets upset that a migrant has sexually assaulted a school child and they all get together and say, please stop doing this to us, well, the counter-protesters emerge and the front pages get their photos, and the police then have the pretext to shut down the original protest because they fear that both sides are going to clash, even though they brought them there in the first place.
One way to invalidate, or one way in which you can attempt to invalidate increasing and rising anger among the host population over the sort of replacement migration experiment through which we've been living for many years now, is either to present it as having been vanquished by the forces of virtue, and this is the sort of controlled spontaneity operation we saw last year, where people like Nick Lawes were saying there are going to be loads and loads of far-right protests, make sure that we have as many counter-demonstrators on the ground as possible, and then it's presented as a victory for goodness and common sense and all the rest of it. So you can either present the movement as having been vanquished by the better angels of our society, or you can try to discredit it by making it seem disreputable. Charlie, it seems to me, at least, I don't know whether you agree or whether you would like to add thoughts of your own, but it seems to me that the police here were almost keen to provoke what had up until then been actually quite a peaceful and civilized and actually quite intelligent protest. If you watch some of the speeches that were made, particularly by a very outspoken woman, like Essex woman, online about how her children weren't feeling safe and all the rest of it, do you think that the police were trying to provoke the protesters, the anti-immigration protesters, by ensuring that there was as much conflict as possible on the ground that day?
Well, there's no way of interpreting it another way, because we've seen with marches like this in like London, Tommy Robinson's pro the nation rallies. There's normally counter rallies going on, and the police make a concerted effort to make sure the routes don't cross, keeping everyone separate so that everyone can have their say without things kicking off. So to deliberately put them in the middle of this group, and it was a large group, you have to strong arm them to the front. It can only be interpreted as intending to inflame the group there, and that can only again be interpreted as smear tactics to make people kick off when you get one side going, you're just racist, and the other side's going, well, you're rape apologists. Like, no one wants to be called either of those things, so people are going to get upset.
Yes.
And so I think this is more, it probably comes from even higher than mere Essex police, in that making these protests seem illegitimate. Now, Tommy Robinson said that he was going to take a group up there this weekend, and thankfully he's reneged on that, because myself, among other people, have said to him, look, this is actually the first time we've seen an organic movement where no one else is involved except the locals, and they're winning. In fact, they have won, because those immigrants have now been moved, as we've learned, to Canary Wharf, or at least trying to. And to have large sort of professional groups of protesters, particularly on the right, move around the country from town to town to town, all it does is give the appearance of a couple of thousand people who are agitating,
right,
don't really care about the issue.
Yes.
And it gives the government ammunition to go, well, this is just manufactured outrage. This isn't really what the people care about. Or they care about it, but not that much. But when you have individual towns, individual communities across the country coming together and saying, no, our particular hotel, we don't want this. When that happens again and again and again, it creates that legitimacy, particularly because for the first time, I think, in Epping, almost no one had their face covered. It's normally a mix of people who are wearing balaclavas, covering their faces, not using their names. These were people who were happy to have their faces on camera, their names known, because they're not professional agitators, and they believe in their opinion, and they don't care about the consequences, because things are dire in these communities now.
I think it's go on.
Well, I was going to say, there were some people that had their face covered.
That's right.
As photographs showed. They were on the Stand Up to Racism side, and conspicuously, they had their faces covered, they had sunglasses on, even though it was creeping into the evening, and yet they weren't the ones holding placards. And we know from the sort of former football lad protests that, and we know even from things like the Uber protests in France a number of years ago, multiple governments have employed agent provocateurs to go in and discredit protest movement from the inside by trying to encourage existing members of the protest or themselves starting violence.
To be violent, yeah.
Exactly. And we saw this be the narrative that emerged from the post-Southport Vigil riot. I'm not suggesting that there was an agent provocateur there, But it was always blamed, all the violence, all the disruption with police, it was always blamed on drunken football hooligans who had got the train in, people outside the community committing far-right thuggery, which was the takeaway term.
Exactly, and this simply wasn't true, because if you look at the arrest rate and the location of all these people that have supposedly bussed in to Southport at the time, there are a handful of people that have come from Manchester, Liverpool. I do mean like a handful, like 10 to 20 people, given there are a couple of thousand there. And you can expect that. There are people who are out there to have a good time. They kind of don't care what the cause is as long as it's anti-establishment. But a majority of people came from Banks and Southport and a few villages outside of it. These were local people who were genuinely terrified and outraged at what had happened, but these individuals were monopolised on by the government for their narrative to say the whole thing's far right, the whole thing. I mean, there's a new documentary coming out today, I think, tomorrow, 24th of July, created by Channel 4, along with Amos Pictures, a BAFTA-winning documentary team, who instead of focusing upon the things that went wrong in terms of preventing Rudakabana or the systematic failures that took place. Instead, they're focusing upon the riots, and they describe it to the Southport community who've been notified that this is coming out, that they're portraying these riots as completely disconnected from the Southport attack itself.
Yes. I sense an increasingly a desperate tone setting in among our elites as well, because I don't want to exaggerate the potential like revolutionary importance of these protests. I think they're an important signal of where the mood of the country is heading, indeed where it already is. But I don't think that this is necessarily at this stage an insurgent movement in the making. But I do think it is notable that it is much, much harder, not least with the onset of social media, for our elites our political establishment to try and control these sorts of events anymore.
To lie to us.
To lie to us, yes. To engage in sort of systematic falsification of what's going on the ground. It's very convenient of them to act as if, well, Britain's actually being run very seamlessly. There is just this sort of fixed cadre of ne'er-do-gooders in the country who we will call far-right thugs, who, independently of any policy that is being pursued by the British government, are just up for fisticuffs.
And they're also always to blame for any integration barriers for the new arrivals.
Correct. This
was set forth in the December report that Dame Sarah Khan and Hope Not Hate wrote. They were targeting conspiracy theorists and the far right, with basically no mention of Islam or Islamism.
Exactly.
And they specifically said it is a barrier to integration. So the premise is all of these people from all over the world, from all different cultures who have hostility towards the host population would just be fine and dandy if the far right stopped noticing differences and kicking off about it.
Correct.
Hello. Please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
And whereas an actual fact, of course, that not the vast majority of what passes for far right in our society just wouldn't exist without the perverse diversity experiment that our elites have been trying on us without democratic consent for many, many years. It's never popular for a native population to be like bombarded demographically in this way. There is no sort of corner of the map where that ever goes down well. This is just this is just inherent and latent in human nature. Never, of course not.
I think you yourself made a distinction about the two kinds of colonization, like being administrative and then demographic.
Yes.
And even when Britain was in India, we had about 20,000 British people in there. Compared that, we're getting 20,000 people, within a couple of months.
Yes.
In the summer season.
And the British people on the ground. So yeah, I think the Indian Civil Service was the white personnel in the Indian Civil Service was roughly that size in terms of white British people overall. I think it maxed out, if I recall correctly, at about 150,000. But nevertheless, there was a sort of an intentional effort on the part of the administrative authorities there to make sure that native Indian sentiment and tribalism wasn't triggered, given human nature, by the perception that they were being sort of swapped out. And India, bear in mind the population differences as well, 150,000 white British people in India, a continent-sized country, is an absolute drop in the ocean compared to the sort of demographic colonization through which we've been going, which is not just administrative, it is demographic. It does
and at the time,
the foundations of the country.
It being administrative as well. Like it or not, there was a cultural expectation set down for that arrangement of people at the time.
Correct.
And it's like you can either buy into it and benefit or stay outside of it and not. And so there was a shared culture and a shared aspiration going on that is just non-existent, in fact, frowned upon.
And I think it's really crucial to point out as well that there was a very, very... I'm not saying everything was perfect, it definitely wasn't, and there were, the Indian Mutiny is an example of native unrest that kicked up, although it wasn't quite as simple as all that, because some Indians actually took the side of the British in that quarrel in, I believe, 1857. Anyhow, there was a principle of mutual recognition among the white British in India and the Indians themselves. There was never a pretense among white British people present in India that they were just as Indian as you are. There was an acknowledgement that we had here two different peoples. It was a sort of an aspirational joint entity between a largely British administrative sector and Indian society as a whole.
Another example, homegrown example, that I know is now woven into the sort of Great Bayou tapestry of Britain always being a nation of immigrants, but 1066 and the Norman conquests, looking at the continuity of the people between 927 and 1027, Ed West has written this in his book, we're over 90% the same people, the same stock. And the Normans themselves only left about a maximum 5% genetic imprint on all of the peoples in this Isles.
Maximum, yeah.
It was a replacement of the ruling elite, just like it was the civil service being replaced in India. And this birthed the kind of mindset that was considerate to the Anglo-Saxon peasantry at the time, which is best encapsulated in, of course, Rudyard Kipling's famous poems, "Leave the Saxon well alone, otherwise you will arouse his ire." And I think the Saxon hasn't been left well alone. We're seeing their ire now. The one thing I might add, though, the difference between far-right thuggery, balaclava-clad protests, even football lads getting a bit drunk and kicking off and scrapping with police, as David Starkey has observed, these emergent protests are populated by largely middle-aged women.
I was about to get to that.
That is the big market difference, because when you have sort of mums, grandmothers, concerned women who are speaking to BBC Newsnight and going and feeling the need to denounce reform and say they're not right-wing, but they're still concerned about their children's safety, it shows...
And showing their faces.
Exactly. There's a preference cascade. It's an organic preference cascade in the direction of we are sick to death of foreign sex criminals pouring under our border and paying for it.
The three, we'll just add very quickly that the three major consequences of the Norman conquest were legal, linguistic, and architectural, all of the lovely castles that we have up and down this land. It had a huge effect on the English language, had a huge effect on law, and a huge effect on the built environment, but next to no demographic effect, you're quite right to say. So yeah, that distinction between demographic colonization and administrative colonization, I think, is really key if we're going to assess these moral questions adequately. But as for what you're saying about the sort of rising tide of intolerance, in the good sense, among sort of often people who are just ordinary members of the public, including white women and mums and that sort of thing, I found it very interesting that the woman who I wish we knew her name, she made a very sort of eloquent protest, a speech with a megaphone in Epping, I think the day before this all happened, or maybe a couple of days before that. And she used a formulation that I think is very, a linguistic formulation, the way in which she spoke about the matter, that I think is very suggestive and indicative of the discourse moving in exactly the right direction. Because traditionally, the defensive posture of people on our side of things, I don't want to say the right, because she may not be right-wing in the traditional sense, but people who are intolerant of this demographic experiment, the discourse, that we've always sort of felt the need to brandish our anti-racist credentials in advance and to sort of meet the moral purity tests of the people who are administering this experiment in the first place and who present resistance to the experiment as itself proof of racism. And so we're always sort of on the back foot. We have this sort of weak defensive posture that makes it much easier for us to lose the argument because we're constantly on the back foot. She said, and I think this is something we should be doing much more often, if being opposed to X, Y, and Z, and she filled X, Y, and Z with some obviously worthwhile things to oppose, pervy foreign men trying to kiss young children, rape gangs, like two-tier policing, all the rest of it. If you insert those sort of obviously bad things into X, Y, Z, and then you say, if X, Y, and Z, in other words, those things make me this thing that you want to accuse me of, or make me that thing that you want to accuse me of, then fine. And I think that that is a testament to like a growing sort of resilience and a growing moral fibre among the host population that should be celebrated and is directionally encouraging.
This is what Kelly J. Keene's done for a long time with the gender movement. When she had her debate with Piers Morgan on TV, he kept calling her transphobic, and she just went, yeah, I am. I absolutely am. Keep calling me transphobic. I still don't want men in women's sports and in women's changing rooms and in women's prisons. And they have won that issue out. Rupert Lowe's been doing the same thing of, I would rather be called racist than enable the rape gangs. Correct. So sit there, Emily Maitlis, all you like. I know that the facts are on my side, and I know that when the day is done and we have won and the law has done what it's meant to do and has not done for a long time, that I will be vindicated. And I think we should carry ourselves with the same level of courage rather than constantly preface everything with, no, I'm not racist, but, and then undermine yourself.
Correct.
Well, what will be interesting is how liberal progressives react to this, because at the moment, they're just intensifying the insults.
Yes.
There will come a point where there is an inflection point where so many people are completely unbothered by these epithets thrown towards them, knowing in their heart that it's not true of them, which is the fundamental way you can move past these things. Is you know your own heart, you know your own integrity. You don't need someone else's permission to move through this world with integrity. What will be interesting is how they then adjust their arguments, if they adjust their arguments.
I doubt it.
They don't have any arguments.
Look at the Democrats in America. They are still shrieking fascism. Like 1,300 of the State Department employees that were conducting malicious compliance just got fired, and they left up posters everywhere saying, "For those that remain, remember you are resisting fascism." They can't deprogram themselves, despite the title of this lovely show. This was actually most evident. I saw you responding to this clip with this Green Party councillor who was outside the hotel protesting Canary Wharf, and. Look,
let us just blast that on the screen now so that people can watch exactly what we're talking about, and then we'll get into it.
We have a lot of stakes in the conflicts and the climate crisis that causes people to be refugees and have to come to another country. They're not choosing to leave their country at their home, their children, their parents.
Our fucking children, you silly cunts! Of our children,
Excuse me.
who gets fucking raped, you silly cunt! Fuck off!
So look, I don't advocate shouting at women, swearing at them, etc., no matter how disgusting their views frankly are, and she is endangering all sorts of other women and girls by her pathological altruism. However, you can tell that she has never been met with that kind of resistance before, when she was just rattling off the kind of platitude that would get her selected as a plant in the Question Time audience. And it is good to see that she's not going to question her own worldview, but it is good to see that she is not comfortable about having that luxury belief, which then inflicts all sorts of atrocities on 14-year-old girls in Epping.
I found it so compelling, that interaction, because, I mean, people made some obvious comments that she's never been spoken to like this in her life. She's clearly never interacted with, blue-collar working-class men, those kind of brash, unapologetically masculine men. Yeah. Sure, fine, obvious, worth saying, but I found it more interesting, her reaction to it, because if she had pearls, she would have clutched them, because her hand went up there, and she didn't know what to say for a few moments, and then after a second, she went, "Excuse me," as if like, I'm still speaking, what are you doing? Because it was the only reaction she knew how to have. Yes. There was no content switching there whatsoever. There was no shifting of her language or perspective to be upon the level of the person that was addressing her, so that they could have a better interaction and respond appropriately to each other. And for me, it just indicated that she's never had a relationship in her life that wasn't governed by bureaucracy. So the reason she didn't understand him was so shocked is because she clearly never had an in-group preference in her life. She's met with a man who basically only has an in-group preference. And to have that kind of relationship in your life, you need close friends tied to a community that's geographic and not just internet or intellectual. She does come across as sort of like the private school upper class type. If you've got that's a very formal environment. I'm just speculating now, but I think it's true of a kind of phenotype that's out there. If all your friendships are from people from abroad, from very affluent countries, and you're coming together within a school which has got a very prescribed moral outlook and what prescribes your morality for you, but also prescribes how you interact with people and how you talk to people. You can imagine the way in which her parents disciplined her. It was never shouting. It was always, right, you go and sit down, you think about what you've done, you come back and apologise. It's very bureaucratic. There was no organic reaction to what was going on. She kind of didn't know how to handle herself. And this is how workplaces are run. This is why you get people getting into so much trouble in workplaces between those who have all different kinds of affiliations and people of different politics. They've learned to adjust themselves and react in different ways and not force kind of mode of interaction. But when you come from these very liberal spaces, they're actually very socially constrained, and people don't know how to act in this situation. And that's kind of what we're up against, and why you can't break that narrative, why she won't necessarily go away and reinterpret her worldview. No. She does not have the tools to deal with it. Yes. And you kind of have to be sympathetic towards that.
My sympathy dries up just because of the existential nature. I mean,
I'm sure.
I don't think the conduct is great, just yelling at women, but I mean, the late Alistair MacIntyre observed this, that we have not examined each other's moral priors, and when we do, we find that they're so incommensurate, we're trains travelling on a parallel track. And eventually the tracks will intersect, but nobody's willing to pull the brakes. And I think that demonstrates her inability and her unwillingness to shift gears and be inquisitive and ask, okay, why are you so angry? And to empathise with the people who are directly affected by the consequences of her luxury beliefs mean that, okay, she's definitely not willing to pull that brake. The other guys have way less to lose by not pulling the brake.
He's put the accelerator on.
Exactly. And the same thing happened at Southport with Keir Starmer. When he showed up, he got heckled, and because he has no internal monologue and doesn't dream, he couldn't adjust on the fly and just scarpered, and then inflamed the situation even worse.
They have been caught completely flat-footed, not just at the level of action, but at the level of, gosh, how do we update our software? Because you were talking about a particular woman there, Charlie, and so you, Connor. But there's a sense in which this woman is a sort of stand-in for what our moral order has been for the last sort of 40 years or so. I mean, whenever you want to date it from, certainly from the sort of public sector ethos that's began to set in under New Labour, like these have been the official, and I would argue very suicidal mores that our society has run on, and we're sort of we find ourselves at a sort of liminal moment now, similar to the two sort of parallel trains sort of intersecting with one another on a sort of full course collision. But I would argue that if we're going to pursue that analogy, one of the trains is speeding up. That is to say, the sort of intolerance of people who are sick of women like that existing in our society at all, still less running the damn thing. They're accelerating, they're feeling emboldened. We are increasingly, we no longer feel the need to apologize. We feel a growing sense that we've won the argument, that right is on our side. These people are being caught fairly flat-footed in the process, because they're realizing that their rhetorical tools, words like racist, words like fascist, words like far right, these have grown blunt through overuse. And they can no longer count on the linguistic games, the prevailing linguistic games in our society, being rigged in their favour and rigged against us. Because the truth of the matter is, these words are only as powerful as we allow them to be. Because like words acquire their power through being assigned it socially. And the more that people check out and realise that it is exactly this sort of moral software that is, sending us off the edge of the cliff, And actually, I prefer to bequeath a functional civilization to my children, even if it means being called racist. The meme, save Western civilization, get called racist. Don't save Western civilization, still get called racist.
Yes.
But once we find ourselves in that sort of binary, the choice is easy for ordinary people, and they're increasingly emboldened to pick the right one.
I think the emboldening comes not from feeling like you've won the argument. I feel it is the recognition there are some things that are not up for debate, and they're already not up for debate for the other side. And the thing that clicked that in my head when you were saying that is the Green Party councillor, young girl in question, is one in a party where last year, what's his name, Mothin Ali, was yelling Allahu Akbar, this is for Gaza, and now he's running as the co-leader of the Green Party. But also, this is the kind of woman that's the avatar of all the people all the white middle class sort of civil servants and middle managers that were chanting along with Bob Villan at Glastonbury that the Gammons are going to be dispossessed of their own country because he has some sort of historical ethnic grudge despite being half English himself. And so lots of people are just going, oh, right, this isn't actually a conversation. This isn't a debate with shared premises. We're not negotiating marginal tax policies in order to fund public services. You just hate me because of my skin colour and you want to steal my country away from me.
Good to know.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
But that's what's changed in the last year, is that all of these things that perhaps you or I or any of our colleagues had been repeatedly saying is that...
And right too early on.
Yeah, is that these motivations were always there, but they were cloaked under things like, we just want integration and stuff like that. Now that playing that nice has gone, completely evaporated, and the progressive side has laid their cards on the table going, this is what we want, we can now play them at their level. We don't have to pussyfoot around with niceties. We can just go, oh, that's your ambition, is it? Well, my ambition is to stop that.
Correct. And there's also sort of a public information campaign that is sort of underway. Like, you find that these people, before I would have said, and I still would to some extent, that the British people, most of them are bloody sensible, so they don't actually pay too much attention to the intricacies and the arcana of politics, still less ethnically disaggregated crime statistics.
Not Bob Villan listeners.
No, exactly. Nor are they really kind of plugged into that sort of low IQ race communist rap scene. But they are, like, increasingly, social media has blown this wide open, and all of a sudden you have all these graphs, like detail, either videos of individual events that are just prima facie absurd, of sort of foreigners walking like naked through the streets or whatever it might be, like just
stealing
swans from the park, all that sort of thing,
washing themselves in a fountain.
Exactly. And then you also have statistics, and I was going to bring one up because we might have to get the award-winning independent journalist and part-time anthropological tourist Kunle Drupko to confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that chap, given his name, is Ethiopian. And I've looked up the statistics, and these are the sort of statistics that Restore Britain are sort of blaring out on social media at the moment. They are spreading at a rapid rate. This man was probably Ethiopian, it seems reasonable from his name to infer, and they are towards the high end of the sexual assault data. 6 times that. They commit sexual assault at a rate 6 times that of British citizens. Note, I said they're British citizens, which is to say British passport holders, not even necessarily members of the indigenous population, because remember, many of the leaders of those Pakistani rape gangs were themselves administratively, to use that word again, technically British. And people are increasingly aware of this, and it is forming their opinion. So no longer do we just have, as a population, pretty sublime instincts, as Disraeli put it. We actually have greater knowledge of the situation, which just gives us an edge, and these people have nothing else to say in return.
Well, not least because we're not picking out really niche statistics, which is where you kind of had to go before, because the research simply wasn't there. Yeah. But you can just go to ONS, census data, or Met Police crime statistics.
FOIs in the Telegraph.
Completely unrefutable.
Watch Lewis Brackpool's latest.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting, these people that were just always sort of saying, oh, well, we're just on the side of the truth or the facts, and when the facts don't go in their favour. Well, this is the thing. Per capita, right, there is a sudden amnesia as to what per capita means on the left. They knew exactly what it was back during BLM and the riots that summer, right? They would say that, well, black people are disproportionately stopped and searched, they're disproportionately attacked by police, they're disproportionately this, that, and the other. Because, well, what does disproportionately mean? It means for the number of people in the population, they are stopped and searched, etc., more than the percentage of population. As soon as that's flipped around and go, okay, well, maybe that's true, but it also so happens that they're being convicted for XYZ crime at a disproportionate level. Is that still systematic racism, or is there something to it? And you kind of seeing, well, what happens is they boycott the framework that they themselves created. But for people who aren't capable of boycotting the framework, they simply say, well, this is a far-right dog whistle.
Yes. If they pick and choose when they want to be statistically illiterate and when they want to be full-blown autists. Which I regard as...
We can't turn it off.
Which
I was going to say, competing against the side of autists. So.
Exactly. So it's very sort of self-serving epistemic games that they like to play with us. Charlie, you are well known in your own right, but I think one of the things that people most know you for in the last year has been your assiduous coverage of the Southport murders that took place last year. And of course, 1 year on from that, there is, if anything, probably more pent-up anger and frustration. We're talking about it now. We're talking about the way in which it's actually very well informed and is increasingly difficult to contain and to present as just sort of far-right agitation, because you have all of these videos of actually quite intelligent local residents making good arguments. But there is, of course, like lots of pent-up frustration here. Do you think that we are likely to see another summer of civil unrest? I mean, Epping is already, pretty febrile in that way.
It's difficult to say because the British are such a, and let's just say the ethnically British, because it comes with a certain kind of closetiness about being forthright. That's just very genetic to us. But the British are very reticent about kicking up a fuss, and we're sort of very apologetic afterwards. You sort of think of someone who stands up on a train and goes, "Would you be quiet?" and then sort of sits down awkwardly.
Yeah.
I thought last year with the Southport riots, which lasted from 6 days, nearly a week, dribs and drabs afterwards, sort of hardcore, non-stop riots for 6 days. I thought that would be the beginning and the end. And come the conviction of Axel Ruda-Cabana in the January of this year, and all the things that came out when we were told, oh, he's a Welsh choir boy, and it's like, okay, but he's actually a second-generation immigrant, and in fact, he never even went to church and then was a choir boy. But also things like, oh, there's no links to Islam, okay, but has a workable jihadist manual in his room, fine.
And is apparently now, according to Lewis Brackpool, and I think GB News as well, being visited by an imam in prison.
Yes, yeah. So
he was attending mosque in Belmarsh, yes. And also for years was looking up obsessively the London Bridge and Manchester Arena attacks. So
yeah, exactly. And so the level of deception, the twisting of the facts, like, oh, well, he can't be a full-out Islamist because he didn't declare it, and actually he had, a Hitler book, and he had, Rwandan genocide book, and was looking at Pol Pot and whatever else. It's like, it's just the disingenuousness of it. I thought people on the front bench were going to lose their positions because it was so untenable. And personal side note, but like I kind of went into like a bleak midwinter from January of this year to about now, and I couldn't work out what it is. And I spoke to a friend who said, well, you were expecting something to change and it didn't, and your whole understanding of holding power to account has been shattered by this experience. And I didn't realised. I was like, no, surely not, because I all my friends are doing wonderful things, but that is what happened. Is that fundamental expectation that people will be held to account for bad things eventually simply isn't true. And so for some people, that's generated a hopelessness where they've just given up and gone, there's nothing I can do to reverse the decline of the nation. There's nothing I can say, tweet, put out at work, say down the pub that's going to vote, nothing that's going to change course, and so I surrender. Or you've got the other people who go, well, if that's the case, I have absolutely nothing to lose. And these are the people that you're beginning to see on the streets. And again, these aren't agitators, as we've sometimes seen in the past, people who are looking for a good time rather than caring about a cause. Even if they do care about a cause, it kind of gets subverted by their will to have fun. And so will we see another rioting?
Civil unrest this summer?
Yeah, I don't know, because something happens and it kind of calms people down. But how quickly you saw the protests outside the hotel in Epping re-emerge in Canary Wharf was astonishing.
Yes.
And I loved it because, again, ordinary people. It wasn't the renter mobs that you see on the left. It was locals going, excuse me,
what do you
and
think
coming
you're doing?
out. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the level of police response I found really intriguing as well, because it's like, okay, Canary Wharf, for those who aren't in London or abroad, it's a very affluent area. It's a very new, modern banking district in London. You have to have a few pretty pennies to be living in the area. And so the fact that these, otherwise well-to-do people, very busy people sort of went,
Yes.
I'm not particularly happy about this.
You have to have a few pretty pennies, or you have to be fresh off the boat.
Yes,
And
yes.
then you get given social housing,
Yeah.
or you get given hotel accommodation, Connor.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's more of these that spring up. I saw a map going around not too long ago. It was passed along to me by a family member from a sort of local group chat on Facebook, or a local group, and someone had just posted a map where there's an asylum hotel in Dartford right near a school. So the same thing is happening in multiple towns and cities across the country, and I think the government know about this because they're constantly hunkered down in the Starmer bunker like Hitler in Downfall, worrying, as was printed in the Times the other day, and I know the Times is sort of the strategic leaking outlet for the government of the day or whatever, but still, it was
Fraser
printed.
Nelson's brain leaks out of the Times as well.
Yeah, his
Yes.
containment operations are
Yes.
getting particularly weak. I feel like the fish in SpongeBob. How many times do I have to teach you this lesson, old man? Anyway, point being, in the Times the other day, the comments by Keir Starmer saying it's vital importance to reforge the fraying social fabric, and you had Lucy Lloyd, head of Number 10's policy unit, saying
Angela Rayner said similar things.
yeah, that this is the edges it's fraying at are the areas that have seen mass migration. Angela Rayner herself saying, it's the responsibility of the government to heal community cohesion. What's her strategy? Another Islamophobia law to censor. You're talking about grooming gangs. That's going to work.
And a mass dispersal of third worlders into your own neighbourhood.
Yeah, Operation Scatter, where they're battery farming all the Eritreans and Afghans that are 22 to 20 times more likely to commit sex offences. Fantastic. But I think that we are seeing that they truly believe this because, as Dominic Cummings put in a recent Substack post, their response to the increasing cognizance of the downgrading of status by the white host majority population is to run propaganda exercises saying, and this is Dominic Cummings' words, the far right brackets code for white people are the real problem. So if they feel the need to constantly clamp down on social media, to constantly demonize the things that we've been warning about for ages, because none of us would like violent riots in our areas, we'd quite like to live in a peaceful, homogenous, cohesive society, but hey, we're not allowed that at the moment.
Where we can debate tax rates.
Yeah, it would be very nice to go back to talking about economic questions like previous generations were able to in the 80s, but apparently that's not afforded to us. The fact they feel the need to clamp down on that and constantly censor and suppress and demonize it means that they themselves are worried about something kicking off.
Yes, well, in the members section of our conversation, Charlie and Connor, we will elaborate on this because, of course, Professor David Betts at King's College London has been making these very concerning predictions about looming civil war. He views it as inevitable. He doesn't think that there is a political solution. I actually have a discussion for my other show, The Forward, with the European Conservative, coming out on Saturday that people can get hold of. But we will talk about the likelihood of looming civil war.
Well, it's not civil war, is it? It's decolonisation.
This is true. This is true. So we will get into all of this very, very important arcana in that section of the show. But listen, Charlie, thank you very much for joining us as a guest panelist on Deprogrammed. It's been a privilege hosting you. Connor, thank you very much. As ever, you have been watching Deprogrammed. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so. If you would like to catch the extra member section, do consider signing up as an NCF member by visiting our website. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and we shall see you on the next.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture and its people, and indeed Western civilization. at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.